Lisa always loved carnivals. The bright lights, the sweet smell of cotton candy, and the cheerful laughter of children created an atmosphere that made her forget all her problems. So when she saw an advertisement for the opening of a new amusement park called Dreamy Whirl on the outskirts of town, she couldn't contain her excitement. The park was opening on Friday, and Lisa decided to go there right after work. She parked her car in the nearly empty lot and was surprised to notice that there were far fewer visitors than she expected for the first day of operation. As she approached the entrance, she was greeted by an old man with a long gray beard. His eyes were strangely empty, and his voice was hoarse when he said, "Welcome to Dreamy Whirl, where your dreams can become reality, or a nightmare." Lisa shuddered but chalked it up to an attempt to create an atmosphere of mystery. Inside, the park looked somewhat neglected. The paint on the rides was peeling, and some booths were closed. However, this didn't stop Lisa. She decided to start with a classic attraction, the Ferris wheel. As she got closer, she noticed that the Ferris wheel looked older than the other rides. Its cabins were made of dark wood and decorated with strange symbols. The ride operator, a middle-aged man with a pale face, silently pointed her to one of the cabins. When Lisa sat in the cabin, she felt a strange sensation. It seemed as if the temperature suddenly dropped by a few degrees. The wheel began to turn, and with each rotation, the park below became less and less like the one she had seen earlier. On the third rotation, Lisa noticed with horror that the people below had disappeared. The park looked abandoned, as if it hadn't been operating for many years. Grass was growing through cracks in the asphalt, and the rides were covered in rust. On the fourth rotation, she saw strange figures moving between the attractions. They looked like people, but their movements were unnatural, as if they were puppets in the hands of an invisible puppeteer. Lisa's heart was racing. She wanted to scream, but no sound came from her throat. The wheel continued to turn, and with each new rotation, the scene became more and more eerie. On the fifth rotation, she saw a huge dark figure standing in the center of the park. The figure slowly turned its head and seemed to be looking directly at Lisa. Its eyes glowed with an ominous red light. Suddenly, the wheel stopped, and Lisa's cabin was at the very top. She felt something cold touch her shoulder. Turning her head, she saw an old doll sitting next to her. The doll slowly turned its head and smiled, revealing a row of sharp teeth. Lisa screamed, but her scream was drowned out by a sudden gust of wind. The cabin shook, and for a moment Lisa thought she was falling. She closed her eyes, bracing for impact. And suddenly, it all stopped. Lisa opened her eyes and found herself sitting on a bench near the park entrance. The sun was already setting, and the park was empty. She looked at her watch. Almost 5 hours had passed since she entered the park. With trembling hands, Lisa took out her phone to call a taxi. But before she could dial the number, a message appeared on the screen from an unknown number. "Thank you for visiting Dreamy Whirl. We hope your dreams became reality. Until next time." Lisa rushed to her car, feeling cold sweat running down her back. She started the engine and headed home, trying to convince herself that it was all just a bad dream. But when she glanced in the rearview mirror, her heart stopped. On the back seat sat the same doll from the Ferris wheel, and its eyes glowed in the dark. From that day on, Lisa never visited carnivals or amusement parks again. She tried to forget about what happened, but every night she was haunted by nightmares of dark figures and the endlessly turning Ferris wheel. Sometimes, waking up in the middle of the night, she would hear the distant sound of carnival music and see a shadow resembling a doll flickering in the corner of her room. And each time she wondered, had she really left Dreamy Whirl, or perhaps a part of her had forever remained in that eerie Ferris wheel? In the small town of Millbrook, nestled in the heart of rural America, the annual carnival was the highlight of the summer. For decades, it had brought joy and excitement to the townsfolk, but this year, something was different. Something sinister lurked beneath the cheerful facade of colorful tents and twinkling lights. Tom, a local high school teacher, had always enjoyed the carnival. This year, he decided to take his niece, Sarah, who was visiting for the summer. As they approached the entrance, Tom couldn't shake off an unsettling feeling. The usual bustle and laughter seemed muted, and the air felt heavy with an inexplicable tension. They wandered through the carnival, trying various games and rides. Sarah was having a great time, but Tom's unease grew with each passing minute. He noticed that some of the carnival workers seemed to be watching them intently, their eyes following their every move. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fairgrounds, Tom and Sarah approached the carousel. It was an old-fashioned ride, with intricately carved wooden horses and haunting calliope music. Sarah begged to ride it, and Tom reluctantly agreed. As the carousel began to spin, Tom noticed something odd. The faces of the wooden horses seemed to shift and change, their painted eyes moving to follow the riders. He blinked, sure it was just a trick of the light, but the unsettling image persisted. Suddenly, the ride began to spin faster, much faster than it should. The calliope music distorted into an eerie, discordant melody. Tom tried to call out to Sarah, but his voice was drowned out by the wind and the music. He watched in horror as Sarah's horse seemed to come alive, its wooden body flexing and moving like a real animal. In a flash of blinding light, Sarah vanished. Tom screamed, but no one seemed to notice. The ride slowed to a stop, and Tom stumbled off, dizzy and disoriented. He looked around frantically, but Sarah was nowhere to be seen. The other carnival goers continued as if nothing had happened, their faces oddly blank and expressionless. Tom ran to the carousel operator, an old man with milky white eyes. When Tom demanded to know where Sarah was, the old man simply smiled, revealing a mouth full of sharp, yellowed teeth. He handed Tom a small, ornate mirror, whispering that it would show him the way. Desperate and confused, Tom took the mirror. As he looked into its reflective surface, he saw not his own face, but a swirling vortex of carnival scenes. He saw Sarah, trapped in a twisted version of the fairground, surrounded by grotesque, living versions of the carousel animals. Over the next few days, Tom became obsessed with finding Sarah. He returned to the carnival each night, searching for clues. But each time he visited, the layout of the fairground seemed to change. Rides appeared and disappeared, and familiar paths led to unexpected destinations. Tom began to notice other strange occurrences. People would enter certain tents or rides and never come out. The Ferris wheel sometimes spun backwards, and those who rode it came off looking years older. The cotton candy seemed to move on its own, reaching out with sticky tendrils towards unsuspecting children. As Tom delved deeper into the mystery, he started to uncover the carnival's dark history. Every few years, people would go missing during the carnival's run. Local legends spoke of a deal made long ago between the town's founders and dark forces, promising sacrifices in exchange for prosperity. The mirror became Tom's guide and torment. It showed him glimpses of Sarah and the others trapped in the carnival's supernatural dimension, but it also revealed horrifying visions of his own potential fate. He saw himself aging rapidly, his life force drained to fuel the carnival's malevolent magic. One night, as Tom wandered through the now familiar yet ever-changing landscape of the carnival, he stumbled upon a hidden tent. Inside, he found an ancient book that seemed to hold the carnival's secrets. The pages were filled with arcane symbols and disturbing illustrations of human sacrifices and otherworldly beings. As he read, Tom learned of a ritual that could potentially free the trapped souls and end the carnival's reign of terror. But the cost would be high. It required a willing sacrifice to take the place of all those trapped. Tom spent sleepless nights considering his options. He couldn't leave Sarah and the others to their fate, but the thought of sacrificing himself to the carnival's dark power was terrifying. The mirror continued to taunt him with visions of Sarah's suffering and his own potential doom. As the final day of the carnival approached, Tom made his decision. He would perform the ritual and free the trapped souls, including Sarah. He gathered the necessary items: a lock of hair from the bearded lady, a tooth from the strongman, and a feather from the fortune-teller's headdress. On the last night of the carnival, as the moon reached its zenith, Tom snuck into the center of the fairground. He began the ritual, his voice trembling as he recited the ancient words from the book. The ground began to shake, and the carnival lights flickered ominously. Ghostly figures began to appear, the souls of all those trapped by the carnival over the years. Tom saw Sarah among them, reaching out to him with a mixture of hope and fear in her eyes. As the ritual neared its climax, Tom felt a pulling sensation in his chest. He was being drawn into the mirror, trading places with the souls he was freeing. In a flash of blinding light and a deafening cacophony of carnival sounds, it was over. Sarah and the other trapped souls found themselves back in the real world, standing in an empty field where the carnival had been. But Tom was gone, sucked into the mirror to become part of the carnival's dark power. In the years that followed, Sarah never stopped searching for a way to free her uncle. She studied occult books and traveled to carnivals across the country, always looking for a hint of the supernatural. Sometimes, late at night, she would hear the faint sound of calliope music on the wind and see a familiar face in her dreams. Tom, trapped in an endless, nightmarish carnival, waiting to be freed. The Millbrook Carnival never returned, but other towns reported strange, traveling carnivals that appeared overnight and left just as quickly. Those who visited these carnivals often spoke of an odd mirror in one of the tents and a man's face that would appear in it, silently pleading for help. And so the whispering carousel continued its dark journey, collecting souls and spreading terror, always seeking its next victims in the guise of innocent fun and excitement. The laughter and music of the carnival masked the whispers of the damned, trapped for eternity in a supernatural spectacle of horror. In the small town of Oakville, nestled in the heart of the Midwest, there was an old abandoned amusement park called Funland. For decades, it had stood silent and forgotten, its rusted rides and decaying structures a stark reminder of happier times long past. Local legends whispered of strange occurrences and unexplained disappearances connected to the park, but most dismissed these tales as nothing more than small-town gossip. Mia, a freelance photographer with a passion for urban exploration, had always been drawn to abandoned places. When she heard about Funland, she knew she had to capture its eerie beauty on film. Despite warnings from the locals, Mia decided to venture into the park one crisp autumn evening, just as the sun was beginning to set. As she approached the dilapidated entrance, Maya felt a chill run down her spine. The faded sign, barely legible after years of neglect, seemed to flicker to life for a moment, its neon lights buzzing weakly before fading back into darkness. Shaking off her unease, Mia squeezed through a gap in the fence and entered the park. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of metal and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Mia made her way through the overgrown pathways, her camera clicking steadily as she documented the haunting beauty of the decaying attractions. The Ferris wheel loomed overhead, its once bright carriages now rusted and swaying gently in the breeze. As the light faded, Mia decided to use her flashlight to continue exploring. She approached the old funhouse, its mirrors cracked and clouded with age. As she stepped inside, she felt a strange shift in the atmosphere. The air grew heavy and seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. Suddenly, Mia's flashlight flickered and died. In the moments before darkness engulfed her, she could have sworn she saw movement in one of the warped mirrors, a shadowy figure that didn't match her own reflection. Heart pounding, Mia fumbled for her phone, using its dim light to navigate the twisting corridors of the funhouse. As she moved deeper into the attraction, Mia began to hear faint whispers echoing through the halls. The voices were too quiet to make out words, but they seemed to be calling to her, beckoning her further into the darkness. Against her better judgment, Mia followed the sound, her curiosity overriding her growing fear. She emerged into a large, circular room filled with mirrors. In the center stood an old fortune-telling machine, its painted cabinet chipped and faded. Despite the lack of power in the park, the machine whirred to life as Mia approached. A mechanical arm extended, offering her a small, yellowed card. With trembling hands, Maya took the card. As soon as her fingers touched the paper, a jolt of electricity seemed to course through her body. The room began to spin, the mirrors reflecting impossible scenes, glimpses of the park as it once was, full of life and laughter, but with a sinister undertone. Shadowy figures moved in the background, their elongated limbs and distorted features barely human. Mia tried to run, but the room seemed to stretch endlessly before her. The whispers grew louder, becoming a cacophony of pleading voices and maniacal laughter. She caught glimpses of faces in the mirrors, lost souls trapped in the park, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and malevolent glee. Just as Mia felt she could bear no more, everything stopped. She found herself standing in the middle of the park, but it was different now. The rides were operating, music was playing, and the air was filled with the scent of popcorn and cotton candy. But something was off. The colors were too bright, the music too cheerful, and the parkgoers moved with an unnatural, jerky rhythm. A carnival barker approached Mia, his painted smile never reaching his eyes. He welcomed her to Eternal Funland and explained that she was now a part of the park's family. Maya realized with horror that she had somehow crossed into another dimension, trapped in a nightmarish version of the amusement park. Days blended into nights as Mia desperately searched for a way out. She discovered that she wasn't alone. Others had been lured into this twisted realm over the years. Some had been reduced to hollow shells, endlessly riding the carousel or playing rigged carnival games. Others had transformed into the monstrous entities that operated the rides and stalked the shadows. Maya learned that the park fed on the life force and emotions of those it trapped. Fear, despair, and fleeting moments of false joy fueled its existence. The longer someone remained, the more they became a part of the park itself, losing their humanity bit by bit. Determined to escape, Mia began to explore the limits of this supernatural carnival. She found that certain areas seemed to flicker between reality and the nightmare realm. By focusing on her memories of the real world, she could sometimes catch glimpses of the abandoned park as it truly was. During her exploration, Mia encountered other lost souls who had retained some of their sanity. They spoke of a hidden exit, a way to break free from the park's grasp. But to find it, one had to gather certain objects from throughout the park, objects that held special significance to the trapped individuals. Mia embarked on a perilous quest to collect these items. She braved the tunnel of horror, where one's deepest fears came to life. She ascended the Ferris wheel, where each carriage contained a moment frozen in time, echoes of the park's victims. In the Hall of Mirrors, she faced distorted reflections of herself, some showing her fate if she remained trapped. Throughout her journey, Mia felt as though she was being watched. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, always just out of sight. The carnival music would sometimes distort into agonized screams, only to return to its cheerful melody moments later. Park mascots, twisted, amalgamations of human and animal features, would appear suddenly, their glass eyes following her every move. As Mia collected each object, she felt a change within herself. It became harder to remember her life before the park. The boundary between reality and nightmare blurred, and she found herself questioning whether the world outside Funland had ever truly existed. Finally, with all the objects gathered, Mia made her way to the center of the park. There stood an ancient carousel, its paint peeling to reveal strange symbols carved into the wood. The collected objects began to glow and levitate, arranging themselves around the carousel. As the objects spun faster and faster, the air crackled with energy. The park around Mia began to warp and twist, reality itself seeming to tear at the seams. She caught fleeting glimpses of other times and places, the park throughout its history, the moment it was abandoned, and even visions of her own life before she entered Funland. With a deafening roar, a portal opened at the center of the carousel. Mia knew instinctively that this was her chance to escape, but as she moved towards the swirling vortex, spectral hands reached out to grab her. The trapped souls of the park, unwilling to let go of their newest member, tried to hold her back. Mia struggled against their grip, feeling her own memories and sense of self slipping away. In a final, desperate lunge, she threw herself into the portal. She experienced a moment of absolute chaos, a kaleidoscope of images, sounds, and sensations from every point in the park's haunted history. Then, suddenly, silence. Mia found herself lying on the ground outside the fence of the abandoned Funland. The sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. She was back in the real world, but the experience had left its mark. Her hair had streaks of gray, and her eyes held a haunted look that hadn't been there before. As Mia staggered to her feet, she saw something that made her blood run cold. There, clutched in her hand, was the yellowed fortune card from the mechanical fortune teller. On it, in faded ink, was a simple message: "Your journey is not over. Funland is forever." Mia fled from the park, but she knew in her heart that she could never truly escape. In her dreams, she would return to eternal Funland. Sometimes, when she passed mirrors or other reflective surfaces, she caught glimpses of the twisted carnival world. And on quiet nights, she could swear she heard distant calliope music on the wind, calling her back to the abandoned park where part of her would always remain. The locals of Oakville noticed a change in the old Funland after Mia's visit. Some swore they could hear faint music coming from the park late at night. Others reported seeing lights and movement among the supposedly abandoned rides. And there were whispers of a new figure seen wandering the grounds, a woman with streaks of gray in her hair, carrying a camera, eternally documenting the horrors of Funland.